In this video, I'm going to talk about the ISIS default route advertisement. And the first thing that we should talk about that is the, for example, need for the default route advertisement. Why we need to advertise default route. Let me to talk about this in this scenario. As you can see here, we have router 1 connected to the router 2. This is the router 1, L1 router. Also, we have router 2. Router 2 is one of the, for example, L1, 2 router. And also here we have another router, the router 3, and this is the L2 router. You know that in ISIS, we are using attachment bit for advertising or connectivity to the level 2 area or level 2 database. Look at here, R2 in its LSPs should set the attachment bit. When attachment bit set to 1, this means that I have connectivity to the level 2 database or level 2, for example, networks. And with this attachment bit, every routers inside the area can use the closest L1 to router to reach to other networks. For example, as you saw in the previous scenarios, after R1 receiving this attachment bit, it should use it. You can see the default route in its routing table with the next stop of, for example, 10.122, the IP address of the router 2. This means that when R2 has a traffic and it does not have any path for that traffic inside of this area, it can use this default route. Look at here, for example, here we have a traffic to the destination of quad 4, and the quad 4 is not available in the L1 database. Because of that, R1 can send this traffic toward the, for example, router 2, and the traffic forward to the router 2 with the default route. But you know that in R2, when R2 receives a packet, it needs to verify the destination address with the database or level 2 database, and if it finds a path for this packet, it can forward the packet. You know that in some cases we have quad 4 in the L2 database. Look at here, for example, assume that in the router 3 we have one network, quad 3 /32. This is the one of the L2 routes. Because of that, when you are sending the traffic to the quad 3, this traffic can forward with the default route of the L1 area to the router 2, and router 2 can use its L2 database to give the traffic to the router 3 to the destination. Okay, this is the L2 routing. And also first we use the default routing inside of area, inside of level 1 area, and after that we use the L2 database, L2 routing table, and finally we send the traffic to the destination. But here we are talking about another things. Look at here, assume that in router 4 is the router of the ISP, and we need the ISP to reaching to the, for example, internet. Assume that the quad 4 is our internet, quad 4/32, and this is reachable with the router 4. And you know that when R1 receiving a traffic with the destination of quad 4, again R1 can forward the traffic toward the router 2. Why? Because in R1 we have the default route. Okay, and after that the traffic now is received by the router 2. This traffic now is in router 2, and router 2 doesn't have any path for the quad 4 for the packet with destination IP of quad 4 in its L2 database. You know that the quad 4 is the external networks, and we don't have this network in the L2 database. Here you need, such as other routing protocols, a default route, a real default route in the, for example, L2 database. You know, by default in ISIS we are using default route or L1 default route inside of the area. L1 default route, okay, is created by the attachment bit in the, for example, R1. But here we are talking about the L2 default route. L2 default route is the real default route. It is not created with the, for example, attachment bit. You need to generate the L2 default route from the edge of your company. In this scenario, the edge of our company is the router 3. This is the edge. It can sense a default route toward the, for example, inside of the company for receiving the traffic that should go to the internet. Because of that, in this scenario, we are talking about a different type of default route. We don't talk about the L1 default route. We are talking about the L2 default route, okay? You know that R3 as a edge router, it should or need to send default route inside of the company, inside of the L2. And this default route is a real default route. After that, when R2 or some other L1, 2 routers, because they have the, for example, L2 database receiving this default route, they can, for example, use this default route to forwarding traffic toward the edge router. For example, quad 4 traffic can forward it to the router 3, and router 3 can use its static default route or its BGP for forwarding traffic to the, for example, the ISP. Okay, this is the static default route in the router 3. We have a static default route in router 3, and router 3 can forward the traffic received for the internet to the router 4. This is the default route advertisement in ISIS. In ISIS, when you say, I'm going to configure ISIS default route advertisement, this means that you want to advertise default route from the edge router or edge routers inside of the level 2 database. And the level 1 default route is not a real default route. It is the result of the attachment bit, okay? The configuration of this type of default route in ISIS is easy. We are using the same command as we used in the ISIS, in the OSPF, okay? Router config router, you can advertise the default route with the default information originate command. Also, you can use route map for using the conditional default advertisement. I'm going to talk about this command, how we can configure this command, what is the, for example, detail of configuration of this command, and after that we can, for example, use this default route in the level 2 database. Let me to show you our scenario, and after that we can configure this feature. Don't forget that we are configuring the default route advertisement into the, for example, L2 database, not L1 database. Okay, this is our scenario. In our scenario, we have R1 as the level 1 router, L1 and R2 as the level 1, 2 router, and also R2 as the level 2 router, and also our edge router, and also we have the R4 as the ISP router. We are using the quad 4/32. It is the internet for us. Let me to show you how we can configure this scenario first. I configured before this scenario in Notepad. We can use it, and after that we can copy and paste this configuration into the CLI of the routers. Starting with the router 1, in router 1 we have the host name R1. Also we have ETH00 with the IP address of 10.121/24, and also interface loopback 0 with the IP address of quad 1, quad 255. Then I configured ISIS on this router with the router ISIS command. The net is 49.0.0.0.1, and this is the system ID, and then ncell. Then I configured IS type as level 1. Also I enabled the adjacency log adjacency change all. Also, we have interface ETH00 with the IP router ISIS command, and also interface loopback 0 with the IP router ISIS command. Let me to copy this configuration and pasting on the CLI of the router 1. This is the CLI of router 1, pasting here. And now we can go to the router 2. In router 2, this is the L1 2 router. We have host name R2. Also, we have two interface, ETH00 with the IP address of 10.122/24 and ETH01 with the IP address of 10.232/24. Also, router ISIS net 49.0.0.1. Why? Because this is the L1 2 router inside of area 49.0.0.0.1. and also this is the system ID, and log adjacency change all. Interface ETH00 with the configuration of the IP router ISIS, then ISIS circuit type level 1, and after that here we have interface ETH01 with the IP router ISIS command.